Hello and welcome to today's Dorset Council Local Plan webinar, where we will be focusing on the Western Dorset area and landscape. Our speakers today are Hilary Jordan, Service Manager for Spatial Planning, Francis Summers, Senior Planning Policy Officer, and Catherine Van Etten, Senior Landscape Architect. I'm Councillor David Walsh, Portfolio Holder for Planning in Dorset Council, and one of the Ward Councillors covering the Gillingham area. Before we get started, I'd like to remind you of a few housekeeping points that will help you get the most out of this session. The speaker's presentation will run for approximately 20-25 minutes. Following this, we will answer the questions that we have received. Any further questions will either be answered on our website or, if applicable, at a different webinar. Go to www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk and search Dorset Council Local Plan webinars for more details. If you lose connection to the session, then please try rejoining. You may want to ensure your Wi-Fi is at an optimum level by disconnecting all other devices that use Wi-Fi. You might be wondering what a local plan is and why it is so important. A local plan sets out the future of Dorset until 2038. That's covering a 17-year time frame. It outlines the strategy for growth Dorset needs, so housing, jobs, shops, community services such as schools are in the right places and are of the right character and quality. It also helps to protect our unique environment and acts to help alleviate our impacts on the climate. To help plan for you, your children's and your grandchildren's future, we need you to get involved. Our consultation lasts until the 15th of March. It will have run for 8 weeks. This is more than a normal consultation, as set out in our Statement of Community Involvement, because we are consulting whilst in lockdown. We wanted to take as long as we possibly could to try and ensure we could let as many people as possible know about the plan and have time to respond, to have their say. Unfortunately, we cannot take any longer, as this would delay the adoption of the local plan, and we need to progress with the plan to manage development appropriately. If we don't have a local plan in place, our ability to influence the location and character of any development is very much limited. Go to www.dorsetcouncil.gov.uk/Dorset Council Local Plan for more details, and tell your friends and family about the plan to enable them to have their say. We want to hear from as many people as possible. Anyway, back to the webinar, which sets out how the planning team have shaped the Western Dorset area, which includes Bridport, Beaminster and Lyme Regis. After that, our landscape expert will talk about how Dorset's stunning landscape is considered in the local plan. I'll now hand over to Hilary Jordan to help us understand more about these proposals.
Thank you, David. Hello, everyone. As David says, I'm Hilary and I'm going to start today's webinar. To start with, just to outline what we're going to cover, as with all of our place-based webinars, it's got 2 distinct areas to it. To start with, we're going to do the place-based bit, talking about the Western Dorset area and its role in the Dorset Council Local Plan. And Francis is then going to take over and take us through the various settlements and go into a bit more detail about what the local plan proposes in those areas. Following this, the second part, our Senior Landscape Architect, Catherine, is going to talk more about landscape and how we've protected it through the local plan. So to start with, I'm going to talk a little about how the Dorset Council Local Plans set its strategy for the Central Dorset, for the Western Dorset area, and how that was developed. Local plans need to provide for enough homes and employment land across the whole area, and our plan needs to provide enough space for 30,000 homes over the plan period, that is, up to 2038. These targets are set out by national government, but we as a local authority need to decide where the homes should be developed. To help us decide, we've set out a strategy for our area involving dividing the Dorset Council area up into 4 functional areas. These reflect where housing and economic markets influence the need and demand for new homes and employment land in different ways. And we've identified 4 broad housing and economic market areas across Dorset. We then use our knowledge about each settlement within the housing and economic market area and the different roles of the settlements to create a settlement hierarchy. And we've identified a hierarchy with 3 tiers, the top tier being the largest and most sustainable towns in the Dorset Council area. We've sought to concentrate growth at the settlements in the top 2 tiers of the hierarchy, as these are the ones with the largest numbers of facilities, services and jobs. And you can find out more about the functional areas and settlement hierarchies and the principles of how we've worked up the strategy in our Distribution of Development webinar that's available on the Council's YouTube channel. This particular webinar, as we've said, concentrates on the Western Dorset functional area, which includes Beaminster, Bridport and Lyme Regis. So looking at some of the issues we've had to take into account, we obviously need to have regard to national policy in preparing our plan, and this includes taking account of a wide range of environmental constraints, as we've discussed in the Development Strategy webinar. In Western Dorset, we have a wide range of these constraints, including flood risk and coastal erosion, the latter, for example, causing land instability around the Lyme Regis area. The area of outstanding natural beauty, or AONB, that covers almost the entire area of Western Dorset. The rural nature of this western part of the area and recognition that the 3 towns in this area provide services and facilities to those surrounding villages, particularly Bridport with its vibrant town centre. The Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site, either side of West Bay, extending along much of the coast, and also the wider coastal landscapes of the West Dorset Heritage Coast. It's vitally important, and for the Western Dorset area, these include the possibility of creating jobs in the area to reduce the need to travel, and generally enhancing the roles of the settlements. Western Dorset has an outstanding coastline, countryside and character, and obviously this has led to it being a popular tourism destination. Local plan policies can, and our proposals do, build in suitable protection and enhancements for these much loved aspects to help us retain them, and Catherine's going to talk us through a bit more about this later on. The local plan can also help and enhance and protect landscapes, heritage assets and biodiversity. And the Western Dorset area is an attractive area because of its coastline, heritage assets and beautiful countryside, and the local plan policies build in suitable protection for these. I'm now going to hand over to Francis, who's going to tell us a bit more about how these issues and opportunities in the Western Dorset area have informed the strategy for development and what growth we feel is appropriate in this area.
Thank you, Hilary. Hi there, I'm Francis, and as Hilary has said, I'll take you through how the local plan proposes to protect Western Dorset's assets and build on its opportunities. We don't have time to talk through every site in detail, but what I'm hoping is I can bring your attention to some points, and if your interest is sparked, then you can go and have a look through our proposals in the plan in more detail. So you can find the plan on the council's website, so simply search Dorset Council Local Plan, and there's also paper copies available in your local library where they're operating order and collect. So our approach to development over the whole Dorset Council plan area is to focus growth at Tier 1 and Tier 2 settlements, as Hilary has outlined. There's no Tier 1 settlements in Western Dorset, and so growth is proposed in the Tier 2 settlements of Beaminster, Bridport and Lyme Regis, and I'll go into more detail about those now. So Beaminster is a market town, and there are some employment opportunities such as clipper tees, but our research does show that there's still an outflow of workers. There's also a large elderly population here. Both of these types of aspects need consideration when developing the plan. As, for instance, we would need to ensure that there's suitable homes for the elderly at, or at least near to this location. So proposals in Beaminster make provision for around about 120 new homes and 3.8 hectares of employment land. These proposals, we hope, will help maintain the local population and provide opportunities for jobs to reduce the need for the residents of Beaminster to travel out of town for work. So going into the sites in a bit of detail, we've got land to the north of Broad Windsor Road that already has outline planning permission for around about 160 new homes. That area was originally identified for employment uses in a previous plan. However, with the consolidation of Clipper Tees onto the southern side of Broad Windsor Road and the redevelopment of their vacated land for residential uses, it's considered that that part of the site is no longer suitable for employment uses. Land to the west of Tunnel Road, that is a new proposal, and we think that has capacity for around about 120 new homes. It's, if you have a look at the map, it's the site, or one of the sites in orange, and it's located at Beaminster's northwestern edge, which is just a short walk from town centre facilities. In terms of employment then, land to the north of Beaminster at Lane End Farm, it's slightly separate from the town, but it's currently home to several small businesses. So to complement this employment land and help, again, reduce the need for Beaminster residents to travel out of town for work, we're proposing more employment land at land to the south of Broad Windsor Road. That's between Clipper Tees and Lower Barrow Farm. So that's a new proposal, and we hope that that would help support the expansion of local businesses in the area. That site has the potential to deliver up to 3.8 hectares of employment land. One further point to note is that there's a small site to the northwest of Beaminster, which you'll find on a map in pink. That's proposed for our Gypsy, Traveller and Travel and Show People communities. That's not the only site that's proposed for this use in the plan. So if you want to know more, check out Chapter 4, the housing chapter in the plan for more details. It's important that the plan makes provision for everyone in our society and places the housing in the right locations for them. We believe this location is a potentially suitable location for this sector of our society. So development, it can bring with it benefits, and positives arising from the proposals in Beaminster are that they must protect the wildlife on the wooded river channel. If you want to know more about environmental protections, maybe watch our webinar on that subject. Another point of interest is that 2 of the sites propose 2 new bus stops. What I'm hoping that this will portray is that the sites are not proposed solely for housing or solely for employment. All sorts of considerations are taken into account, and each site policy attempts to cover the necessary protection and enhancements relating to that particular parcel of land. Let's move on to Bridport. Bridport is a centre for the arts, culture and tourism, and it is a historic market town. It's relatively self-contained and situated entirely in the AONB, and next to the Heritage Coast and Jurassic World Heritage Site. Due to this, any development here would need to be very conscious of these assets and must take them into account in their design. We're proposing to extend the town centre at rope walks and coach station car park, so long as they provide enough car parking. In addition to this, there's no other growth proposed in this plan, but it would take forward allocations and planning permissions proposed in previous plans or already consented. So growth at Bridport, it's primarily focused around Verse Farm, and if you can see a map, that is the area in black speckled pattern. That site was allocated in the West Dorset, Weymouth and Portland Local Plan, which was adopted in 2015. So the whole of the Verse Farm site could deliver around 930 new homes, but it has consent for around 760. The extra potential for 170 homes is on the 3 residual sites of land at Verse Farmhouse, land west of Coronation Road, and land to the west of Pine View. To help retain the self-containment that Bridport benefits from, this site also contains about 4 hectares of employment land to help create jobs. Another site already allocated in a previous plan that will hopefully come forward early in the plan period is land east of Breedy Veterinary Centre. That has capacity for around about 40 homes. Interesting points to note at Bridport is there is a care village proposed, which is part of the Building Better Lives programme here at Dorset Council. That site would make use of Dorset Council land and buildings off South Street to build housing for the elderly and those with disabilities. It would also provide affordable and key worker housing. Also, there is a community-led housing development site proposed at the Bridport Hospital. That's an interesting community-led way of delivering affordable housing. And if you're interested or you want to know more about that, please check out our website for more details. That site already has permission for 34 custom-built houses and flats, a common house, access road and car park to form a co-housing neighbourhood. And then there's a second phase proposed for that, which is a further 19 custom-built affordable houses and flats. Let's move on to Lyme Regis. Lyme Regis, it's a small coastal town and a popular tourist resort. It's an important centre for visitors to the Jurassic Coast World Heritage Site, which stretches 95 miles along the southern coast, and we've mentioned a few times already. High numbers of visitors can put pressure on some locations in terms of their appearance and physical erosion. So the local plan sets out a positive framework for consideration of such proposals to appropriately manage their growth and development and protect the area's natural and built environment. Hilary mentioned earlier, for instance, that Western Dorset suffers from coastal erosion, and this is particularly prevalent at Lyme Regis. To alleviate that, recent defence works have been completed to hold the line and defend Lyme Regis's town centre. So recognising the popularity of Lyme Regis and its associated high proportion of second homes and high house prices means the plan would like to attempt to retain the vibrancy of the town and create homes for local people, preferably affordable homes. But development opportunities in and around Lyme Regis are very limited, particularly due to the land instability relating to coastal erosion. We have had to look further out of town for suitable sites, which are obviously further from town centre facilities and services. And the only growth considered suitable in this location is an extension of the Woodbury Down site. That's a recent development. A continuation of that site could provide an extra 40 homes for local people. Other than this, there is land south of Colway Lane, which already has planning permission for 45 homes. What I hope that demonstrates is again that the plan takes into account all issues and opportunities presented in each area and seeks to either avoid worsening issues or enhance opportunities. So that's about it for Western Dorset and proposals in this area. If you'd like to know more, again, go and have a look at the plan. I'm now going to hand you over to Catherine, our senior landscape architect, who's going to tell us a little bit more about how our beautiful landscape is protected in the Dorset Council Local Plan.
Thank you, Frances. As Frances explained, I'd just like to talk about the Dorset landscape and how it's protected through planning and the role of the infrastructure and delivery team in which I work. As mentioned, I'm a senior landscape architect for Dorset Council, and I work with a dedicated team of professionally qualified specialists including landscape architects and urban designers. Our role is to support the Council in meeting its priorities, balancing sustainable economic growth, including 30,000 new homes in this plan period, whilst fulfilling its responsibility to protect and enhance Dorset's unique rural and urban environment and act on climate change. Dorset is a unique and special place to live or visit. The environmental quality and character of the area, rural landscapes, rich biodiversity and heritage, the coastline and picturesque towns and villages is what makes it so. Well over half of Dorset is covered by 2 areas of outstanding natural beauty, the Dorset AONB and the Cranborne Chase and West Wiltshire AONB. 95 miles of the Dorset Jurassic coastline is designated as the only natural UNESCO Natural World Heritage Site in England. Most of the Dorset coastline falls either within the West Dorset or Purbeck Heritage coastline and is also subject to policies that protect by the AONB. The Council is committed to guiding sustainable development that is sensitive to the county's exceptional landscape and that is well designed. The landscape is protected by legislation through national and local policy and guidance. National planning policy states that policies and decisions should ensure that developments are sympathetic to local character and history, including the surrounding built environment and landscape setting. Local plan policies and decisions should contribute to and enhance natural and local environment by protecting and enhancing valued landscapes, recognising the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside, maintaining the character of undeveloped coast, and importantly should be sustainable. That is, development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. The draft local plan recognises the high importance and value of the beautiful landscape to the health and well-being of Dorset residents, to the local economy, its biodiversity and habitats, and of the importance of sustainable development and climate change. In addition to the local plan, the AONBs each have a management plan, which developers must demonstrate they have had regard to. On a smaller scale, neighbourhood plans may identify and seek to protect local green space for areas of particular local value or significance. The draft Dorset local plan approach is that all landscapes in Dorset are important, whether they are designated or not. Due to the pressure of development and the climate and ecological emergency, it has never been more critical to consider the environment when planning development. The local plan approach is that all development should conserve and enhance the landscape and seascape, and that development should respond positively to the wider local setting. Landscapes outside the AONB may be identified as valued landscape if the area demonstrates qualities that make it such as scenic qualities, rarity, or recreational value, for example. Valued landscapes may be identified in landscape assessment work or through neighbourhood plans. Where development is proposed within a valued landscape, the impacts of development on the landscape will be weighed against the benefit of the proposal. The local plan policy states that development shown with significant adverse impact on a valued landscape will be refused. As mentioned, there are 2 different areas of outstanding natural beauty, and their area is designated and protected as some of the highest quality landscape in the country. An exceptional landscape whose distinctive character and natural beauty are precious enough to be safeguarded in the national interest. The primary purpose of the AONB is to conserve and enhance this natural beauty, and secondly, to meet the quiet enjoyment of the countryside and having regard for the interests of those who live and work there. Due to the scale of the AONB coverage in Dorset, there is a significant area that is considered to be within the setting of the AONB. The Council will protect AONBs from development which is outside the designated area, but which would be considered to cause harm to its landscape character or adversely affect its natural beauty. For example, visual prominence of proposed development that impacts on views into or from the AONB. The draft local plan policy states that within AONB, major development will be refused unless there are exceptional circumstances and it can be demonstrated to be in the public interest. The Dorset AONB covers over 1,000 square kilometres and 40% of the county, stretching from Lyme Regis in the west, along the coast to Poole Harbour to the east, north to Hambledon Hill near Blandford Forum. The character of the AONB landscape is formed by the contrasting and complex geology that gives rise to chalk downland, limestone country, green sand ridges and clay vales, which are often juxtaposed to create striking sequences of beautiful countryside and uninterrupted panoramic views, unique in Britain. In addition to its outstanding scenic qualities, the AONB retains a sense of tranquility and remoteness, dark night skies, and an undeveloped rural character. To the northeast of the county, the Cranborne Chase AONB covers 900 square kilometres of countryside, overlapping the boundaries of Wiltshire, Dorset, Hampshire and Somerset. It is a diverse landscape with distinct and recognisable character, including areas of chalk rolling grassland, ancient woodlands, chalk escarpments, downland hillsides and chalk river valleys. The landscapes of this designated area are extraordinarily rich in character and diversity. In 2019, Cranborne Chase became the first AONB in the country to be designated in its entirety as an international dark sky reserve. The Dorset Local Plan protects these landscapes and states that development must not conflict with AONB management plans, and developers must demonstrate how they have had regard to them. It is a requirement of national and local policy that all development responds positively to local landscape character, including landscape, townscape and seascape character. Development should seek to maintain and enhance this character and reflect the local distinctiveness, the natural features, cultural qualities that are special to that area. Landscape character is assessed by landscape character assessments, which can be found on the Dorset Council website. The AONB also have their own LCAs for landscape within their boundary. These landscape character assessments should be used to guide principles for development and appropriate mitigation measures. Specific policies in the local plan related to landscape character are clear. Development which significantly harms the visual quality of landscape or seascape character and fails to take opportunities to conserve and enhance these qualities will be reviewed. Again, in policy ENV 8 states that all development should be based on a clear response to the local context and the landscape or townscape character, and reinforce that sense of place. In assessing the potential landscape harm of development, the local authority considers any landscape impact, known as direct, indirect or cumulative landscape impact, and the proposed measures taken to limit or mitigate the impact. For all major projects, the local plan requires the following evidence to be submitted at the earliest possible stage of the planning process to enable a full review of the likely impacts. Evidence required includes an analysis, a study of the landscape sensitivity of the site and landscape character. In addition, an assessment of the landscape and visual impact of development, an LVIA, required on all major developments. Proposals are required to demonstrate how this landscape assessment work has informed development proposals and influenced the design. For example, through strategic green infrastructure belts that may mitigate the visual impact of development whilst providing multiple environmental and social benefits. This requirement for landscape assessment work informs the design of development, is fundamental to sustainable development and a requirement of the local plan. In the next webinar on North Dorset, we'll also cover design and how we work to balance the requirements for sustainable development and protection and enhancement of the environment through design when we are considering planning applications. Thank you.
No, Catherine, thank you. And thank you, Francis, and thank you, Hilary. I always find it fascinating listening to experts talk about areas that you thought you knew, and it turns out you didn't. So it's always an eye-opener. And I was very reassured, and I'm sure people will be, at how highly we value Dorset's stunning landscape. So thank you, Catherine. Now, we've got plenty of questions here, so I'm going to stop talking and move straight into the questions. So if all people could turn their videos on and microphones on. First one's for you, Hilary. Why is additional growth needed when the first development at Verse Farm was so large? And what considerations have been given to reducing the housing numbers set for Dorset by central government, given the environmental constraints and designations of both the Greenbelt and the AONBs in Dorset?
Thank you for that, David. Well, as we said earlier at the beginning of the webinar, the housing target is established nationally, and this is done through the government's standard methodology. We don't absolutely have to follow it, it's not a binding target, but we're required to follow it unless exceptional circumstances justify an alternative approach. And it's important to note that that alternative approach also needs to reflect current and future demographic trends and market signals. So it is still meant to be an economically led approach to developing the numbers. The standard method is set out in National Planning Practice Guidance, which you can look at online. When we were doing this local plan, we considered all of Dorset, including the information gathered in the previous local plan reviews, to help us understand where there were potential sites for development, and that included assessing the impacts on social, environmental and economic matters. And that helped us to understand if we thought it was possible to achieve the housing numbers set out in the standard methodology without causing significant harm. And obviously, as we've said in the webinar again, development can also enhance landscape and biodiversity and can be sensitively designed to reduce harm, as we heard from Catherine. This work, consisting of all our proposed sites at this stage, suggests that we can meet the housing target. And more than that, it also suggests it's possible to achieve this whilst helping to achieve one of our most pressing objectives of alleviating the impact on the climate. And we can do this by putting development in the more sustainable settlements and building in employment land to try and reduce travel needs. Moving on to the first part of your question about Veers Farm, obviously this is already a large site, but as we said, there's some potential for some more development in the residual parts of the site that we have considered can be achieved without significant negative impacts to the environment. It's also important to be aware that it's the area of land that is allocated in the plan. The numbers are estimates at this stage and will be finalised through the planning application process. We're not actually proposing to allocate any additional land at Veers Farm, but there is some land within the originally allocated site that wasn't actually included in the planning application and still has potential for development. So I hope that helps to explain that issue. Thanks.
Thank you, Hilary. That was a very comprehensive answer. Thank you very much. Francis, in general, can Dorset Council be more ambitious in what it expects, or is it constrained by current planning regulations? Could, for example, a restriction on the number of second homes be added in areas affected?
Thank you, David. So I mentioned earlier that, for instance, Lyme Regis has a high number of second homes, and that can be detrimental to an area and reduce its vibrancy, as, for instance, if there are less people there all year round. It's not always the case, but it can be an unfortunate consequence. So in the plan, within the it's chapter 4, we do have a question about second home ownership, and we're basically asking the public, what do they think that we should do about that? But for instance, the Purbeck Local Plan has a primary residence policy, and that proposes to restrict new development from being used as a second home. That plan's at examination, and we'll see what the inspectorate thinks about that policy, but it's not completely watertight, so it's not something that planning can deal with completely on its own. So for instance, we can only, if we were to look at a policy like the one in the Purbeck Local Plan, we could only restrict new development from being sold on as second homes. So we couldn't touch any of the existing second homes. So, and also, as everybody already knows, that does tend to be the older, more chocolate box properties, and we don't have any control over those. The other difficulty is enforcing a policy like that. So if we were to introduce a policy like that restricted new development to primary residence, it's likely that our impact on second home ownership would be small. We also don't know what sort of other effects it might have that are unintended consequences. But we're asking that question, what do our residents want us to do?
Thank you, Francis. Another one for you, Francis. Please, can you confirm what Dorset's preferred sites actually means? Is it preferred for development? If so, why is so much open land and fields preferred? And why is greenbelt land preferred, not protected?
Okay, yeah, good question. Preferred sites, it's a planning term, and it relates to this stage of consultation. It means we've looked at all of the area and along the way almost shortlisted sites that we believe are most suitable for development in planning terms. So that takes into account all the constraints and considerations that we've been talking about in all of our webinars, not just this one. Our final, or at this stage, shortlist is basically our list of sites that we believe could be suitable. And we will review that after this consultation when we've had more feedback from our residents, who they know the local area the best, and also our experts. And that can highlight other issues which are previously unknown to us, and help us shortlist our sites even further. So that's why they're called preferred sites at this stage. In terms of why do we propose sites on open land, fields and greenbelt? Well, maybe watch the greenbelt webinar, which is in amongst the southeastern Dorset webinar, to find out more about that. But we first and foremost look at our brownfield land, which is land that's already been developed. So it's either vacant, unused, or it's in need of redevelopment. So the Dorset Council area is obviously rural, and therefore we don't have a lot of brownfield land, which means that we'll have to look at other options such as green fields. And we have reviewed our greenbelt, which I said, have a look at that webinar for more details on that. And also the distribution of development webinar might help you understand a little bit more about that as well.
Thank you very much, Francis. I'm now going to bring in our landscape architect, Catherine, for a couple of questions. So Catherine, within the Dorset Council Local Plan, what do we mean by landscape?
That's a good question. Simply put, landscape is everything outside and everything in it. When we hear the word landscape, we might often think of the countryside, nature and trees and fields and flowers that make it. However, in planning terms, landscape also includes urban areas, sometimes called townscape, and the coast and the sea, sometimes called seascape. A widely accepted definition of landscape is that areas perceived by people whose character is the result of the action and interaction of natural and/or human factors. So a landscape is a place that people recognise as being different from other places. And it's different because of how natural processes and human actions have shaped it over time. But simply, landscape is everything outside.
Thank you. That was an easy one, wasn't it? And for another easy one, what about climate change, Catherine?
That's a biggie. Well, Dorset Council has declared a climate and ecological emergency, and the draft local plan aims to enable Dorset to both adapt and mitigate the effects of climate change through policies. It's clear that landscape has a part of the solution, such as renewable energy generation, may have impacts on the landscape, which need to be carefully considered. Obviously, landscape policy has a role to play through trying to ensure that any development becomes part of the solution rather than adding to the problem. Hope that clarifies things.
Yes, thank you very much. Now, this is one I think which is very important to people's understanding. Is development automatically refused if it is likely to cause harm to the landscape?
No, the simple answer is not necessarily, but of course it's far more complicated than that. Fundamentally, planning is about comparing the benefits of a proposed development with the harm that it may cause, taking current planning policy into account and coming to a decision. The harm that a development might cause to the landscape might be judged to be outweighed by the benefits that a development may bring, in which case development may be permitted. However, conversely, the harm that a development may cause to the landscape might be considered to be so great and is judged to be outweigh the benefits of a development, in which case development would be refused. The council's role is to identify these harms and benefits and weigh them up in the context of current planning policy and make the decision. The draft local plan sets out landscape policy against the impact of development and how it might be judged in future. And as part of this consultation, we're asking people if they agree with this approach, and if not, what changes they may suggest. So now is a good time to have your say.
Thank you very much. Very wise words there, Catherine. I mean, the whole point in this is that it is a consultation, and we want to hear from people, as many people as possible, with your views. We don't want click and paste. We don't want what your next door neighbour thinks. We want what you think. So come on, all of your views. So thank you all. I know people will have found this very informative. So just a reminder, any questions we didn't get time for will be answered either at a different webinar or on our website within 2 weeks, along with a recorded presentation. Have a look at our webpage for more information on other webinars or podcasts if you're interested in other subjects. So thank you again, and bye for now.